Welcome everyone to the Researchers Tool of Communication and Transformation Workshop, a component for the 2021 Leadership Alliance Virtual Professional Development Series. I want to thank everyone for being here. My name is Stephanie, pronouns are she, hers. I'm a PhD candidate in science communication at Vanderbilt University, and also the founder of Future Doctors, which is a digital media company that aims to increase representation and a sense of belonging and highlight diverse scientists in science, technology, engineering, and math. Just a quick background about me. I'm a Leadership Alliance alum. I've done Leadership Alliance in 2012 and 13. I pursued a bachelor's in chemistry, went on to Vanderbilt University to pursue my PhD, and I earned a master's in chemistry, and now I'm pursuing a PhD in science communication, where I look at representation in media and the importance of creating a culture where belonging and identity is important within our science stories. So using research and communication and as a tool for visibility and transformation, I'm really excited to introduce our two panel speakers today. We have Dr. Kevin Alicia Torres and Dr. Brittany Kamai, two researchers who are also passionate about communication to build community, ignite passion, and transform the world. So Dr. Alicia Torres and Dr. Kamai will each take opportunities to introduce themselves, sharing their stories and experiences in their own voices. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Dr. Torres to invite him up and to get ready for his presentation.
Perfect. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So thank you so much for the invitation to participate on this amazing event. And I'm also an alumni of the Leadership Alliance. So I'm pretty excited to give back to this amazing community that has given so much to my career. And I will just go ahead quickly before I introduce myself. Try to share my screen here. Hope you all can see it. So again, my name is Kevin Alicia Torres, and I'm a cancer immunologist and also a science communicator. I did my bachelor at the University of Puerto Rico in Humacao, followed by a PhD at the University of Pennsylvania. And I'm currently an associate director for the Puerto Rico Outstanding Undergraduate Diversified Program, which is a HHMI or Howard Hughes Medical Institute initiative for inclusive excellence. So we are basically aspiring to create a center for teaching and learning at the University of Puerto Rico. And also I was a AAAS Mass Media Fellow. I've been doing a lot of freelance science communication after I did that fellowship, and I'm pretty excited to share my career path with you all, and hope you have a lot of questions that I will be happy to share with everyone. Let me see if I can go next. Before I start sharing my career path, I would like to thank the whole community of the Leadership Alliance for organizing these amazing virtual events, which are very important, especially during this pandemic that we thought that we're gonna lose contact, and we were gonna miss these networking opportunities. And I'm happy that they're doing this since last year, because it's important to continue growing our network. And without a network, it's very hard to move along throughout your career. And I've been very grateful for the network I have built since I was in the Leadership Alliance. And after that, I have met so many people that they've been key for my success in my PhD and in science communication. A lot of mentors that I have met through the Leadership Alliance. So I would like to start sharing this screen, basically highlighting my career path. Basically, I started at University of Puerto Rico in Humacao, where I did my bachelor's in microbiology. And this image is quite different from the one that I usually show about all the things that I did throughout my career. Here I try to focus only on things that are related to science communication and how I got into science communication. So I would like to first highlight that it was at the Leadership Alliance that I did my first oral presentation about my research. Actually, when I was an undergrad, I didn't have a chance to present and talk about my research. And it was that summer in 2011 when I did my internship at the University of Chicago, where I was exposed to basically science communication, to share my science with the community. Although it was a scientific community, many people that they were part of that community were not specialized in the field that I was working throughout that summer. So it took a lot of time for me to develop the skills to make sure that what I was doing was understandable for the general public that was in that room. And I just wanted to highlight that that was my first experience actually. After that, I started my PhD at the University of Pennsylvania, and it was in this institution that I started to exploring so many opportunities. Then my network continued growing. I met several key persons that they were important for my career. I met a grad student that he was at that time a president for the Science Diplomacy and Policy Group at Penn, and he was very interested in creating bridges in Latin America. And because I was at that moment initiating the SACNAS chapter at the University of Pennsylvania, we kind of collaborated and started with this idea. What about if we start sharing stories about Latin American scientists in Spanish, because we need role models. We know that representation and visibility matters. So let's start doing this. So in 2017, actually 2016, we started talking about this idea, and it wasn't until the following year that we initiated this podcast. It started as a podcast, and now we are working more this initiative of the science communication platform, because we have more ideas that we are continuing adding to this platform, and we are looking for more collaborations and get more people involved in this initiative. So with that connections that I started, developing with SACNAS, I started having opportunities to talk about science and also my career through the media. The first one was Univision. Then when I was doing my thesis work at the Wizard Institute in Philadelphia, I had a chance to translate the science that was being done at the Institute in Spanish with Telemundo. So there were just doors that they kept being opening for me throughout my career when I was doing my PhD. And those experiences in science communication is what led me to the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship. So those experiences were important because it kind of strengthened my application for the Mass Media Fellowship. I never had any experience in science journalism prior to the fellowship, but those experiences were enough for me to convince the reviewers that I was interested in contributing to the science communication field, writing stories. And I focus in the Hispanic community because of my background. I'm a first generation coming from a low income background. And I knew that there were a lot of misinformation and there were a lack of communicating science in our own language, especially in Spanish. So as you can see, most of my work were focused in the Hispanic community. And that's what I did for the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship. I apply only for the Spanish Mass Media Fellowship. And at that moment, it was last year, El Nuevo Día newspaper, which is the most important newspaper in Puerto Rico, was selected as one of the hosts for the fellows that they were doing the AAAS Mass Media Fellowship. And it was the perfect match for me, since I knew this newspaper since I was a kid when I was working in a bakery. And one of the things that we were selling was the newspaper for the general community. So I know this newspaper very well, and it was a perfect match. And I did the fellowship last year. It was an amazing opportunity. It gave me a lot of exposure and a lot of visibility. And then my home institution recruited me back as an associate director for HHMI Inclusive Excellence. Since then, I've been doing a lot of science communication as a freelancer, also a science editor for HHMI Biointeractive, which is our science educational resources for teachers and professors. What I wanted to point out is just that probably doesn't seem like a straight path. Actually, I have so many challenges that I encountered throughout my career that I'm not sharing here. But for science communication, it was challenging in terms of like communicating science in English. I always felt like, Sofia Vergara trying to asking everyone, like, how do you say this? How do you say that? In order for me to kind of communicate my science and make it understandable for the general community. Sometimes it was very frustrating because I had to translate everything that I was in my head from Spanish to English. But at the end, I was able to find a great way to give back to my own community that was in need of science information because there were a lot of misinformation. I think there is misinformation in all languages, but for my Hispanic community, I knew that there were a lot of misinformation, and it was my aim to help them and being that bridge of the science community through the general public. And probably you might seen that, okay, this guy has been successful throughout these things, but no, I mean that it has been very challenging, and there's so many things that people don't see. And I think that's the power of telling our stories, right? Sharing what the challenges that we encountered, how we overcame them, because maybe we can serve as a role model for someone that may experience similar things than you. So I just wanted to leave you with that you may see people that are very successful and are doing great things, but sometimes we don't know what is behind, what that person have to go through in order to reach that, profession or PhD, anything. So I just wanted to point out a couple of things as a science communicator. Sometimes, as a scientist, we think that we can just share to the general public, all the data that we have accumulated throughout our summer program or PhD, or if you're doing research at the undergrad level, and just pretend that people will understand what you're doing. I'm a cancer immunologist and trying to explain how the different immune cell populations work and what are the functions and roles in our body, and how do they like basically evade or help evade tumor cells, basically immunotherapies. So it was very challenging. So coming up with the new ideas and new strategies, I mean, takes a lot of creative moments. You need to be very creative sometimes and collaborate with people that may help you to basically explain your science in a more inclusive and accessible way for the general public. And if you take this mean, sometimes I try to explain immune cells roles and functions as this poster that you can see here that was published by BioLegend maybe like 5 years ago, and try to explain, how the role these immune cells are similar to the role of the Avengers, right? So there's some ways that you can try to start being very creative when you're explaining your science. This image here was super important for me because as you are working now in your presentation for the Leadership Alliance Symposium, we are trained to always uh, develop either the research article or our PowerPoint with the background, the supporting details, meaning like the methods and the result followed by the conclusion. But the general public doesn't care about the background and the details. They just care about the main points. So you have to invert that pyramid, right? And go straight to the bottom line and talk about what are your conclusions. Okay, so you develop a new approach to treat cancer, to treat infection diseases. And then you go at the end, you start, as you engage in the conversation, you can share some details if the person is interested, right? Um, as I mentioned, I co-founded Caminos en Ciencia, which is now a science communication platform focused in Spanish, basically. So we are telling stories of Latin American scientists, trying to know and understand their challenges and how they overcame those challenges to inspire the next generation, because we know that representation and visibility matters in STEM, and that's something that you will continue hearing. So it's important that we create these opportunities to listen to these stories. So Caminos en Ciencia now, we have been able to reach almost every country in the world. So we have listeners from almost across the world. So meaning that there are, Latin American scientists everywhere. And with this platform, we are trying to create bridges with all these communities of Latin American scientists across the map. So one tip that I wanted to tell you is just that, if you see opportunities, throw yourself, as as you can see here, like Bad Bunny is throwing themselves in WrestleMania. So if you see an opportunity, even like a small opportunity, try to go after that. Because at this moment, you're trying to build your CV, your resume, you're trying to get the skills, either in science communication, in science education, outreach, etc. So it's important that, just go for it. At some point, of course, you need to stop taking and accepting opportunities because you might be overwhelmed. But at this moment, at this period of time that you're, a student trying to figure out what is the next step of your career. So just go ahead and try to apply for everything and try and make sure to talk to people. Here are some resources. I'm just gonna skip this slide. I'm gonna share this in the chat. And right now, there is so many scientists that are publishing amazing articles about science communication. So here are just some of them of scientists that I know and that they are doing amazing work in science in the bench and also as a science communicator. So these are some great papers that you can read and get to know about what where is the community of science communication right now at this moment. And it's important to understand that we are trying to make science communication more accessible, more inclusive, to humanize science through storytelling, and also to make it with empathy when we communicate science. So I just want to stop it there and let Brittany tell her story. So muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Alicia Torres. I'm really excited to kind of dive deeper into the resources that you mentioned and also your approach into doing the SciComm that you mentioned about. But up next, we have Dr. Kamai, where she's going to be sharing her story through her own voice and her journey into science communication and her research.
Awesome. Aloha. Good morning, good afternoon. I'm not sure where you're coming in from. So I'm excited to be here. So I will start this presentation by first saying thank you to each and every one of you who made it here. And I know we're in a very intense era, so all of these moments are precious. I also want to acknowledge the ancestral lands which I'm currently on of the Kanaka-Olivi, which are my people. And also I developed this work when I was on the Tongva lands in California. So if you're not familiar with land acknowledgements, as you know, whose lands are you on? Native Land app, you should definitely check out and also contribute to, because there's a lot of, it's open source and community driven. So please, if you know these things, come jump in. So I wanted to start this by sharing a bit of knowledge that I gathered when I was in a slam poetry class back in Chicago. And I think it just, it translates into the way in which we speak about science. And it really resonated with me because no one's ever told me this, right? Like you go through this science path and it's kind of like, oh, you need to say things a certain kind of way or whatever. But really I want to share with you that you get to tell the story that only you can tell, right? So this is going to show up in your research world. So the way that you think about a problem, the way that you gathered information, writing those papers, also when you decide to present information, right? Like that's a story of how you brought everything together. And similarly, when you're telling about your life and what you've done, that's your story. One of my favorite quotes too is be yourself because no one can tell you you're doing it wrong. And so keep that with you as you're trying to move through and think about what you're up to. Just be you. So I'll start my story by telling you where I grew up. I grew up in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So those islands in the middle are the Hawaiian Islands. And for people who are land-based, you'll look at this and see, okay, it seems very connected. But in fact, we were the biggest nation, Polynesia, which covered this entire Pacific Ocean. And we're connected by voyaging, which is how that level of knowledge to develop that technology and wisdom to navigate without instruments across the vast Pacific is where I come from. So this is my baby picture. Yes, Moana. Nah, just kidding. But I was very much grew up in the water. So as soon as I could walk, I walked straight into the ocean. And I was a water baby, like swimming, surfing, all of this type of wonderful things. And I actually played water polo in high school, and it's the reason I applied to college. So here's a quick overview of all the things. So I decided to, I went to college for water polo, and I share that because I did not have any other examples of physicists who are athletes at this level at all, right? So we exist and do your thing. So I played NCAA water polo, Division I, decided to major in physics in undergrad, which everyone in my life was like, I had no idea that was coming. So I say that to you that I was not born in the womb learning how to do derivatives or whatever. I followed my curiosity. I was very curious about the universe having most of what we know about the universe is only a tiny sliver. It's 4%, and the rest of it is just complete darkness. And so that's drove my curiosity and set this in motion. So I went to Europe. I was at Cambridge and Exeter. I also worked at the European Space Agency for a little while, but I also played water polo in the Netherlands. And so if you're thinking about taking a time off between, finishing your undergrad and going into your next phase, take that opportunity, right? Like if you have an opportunity to pursue some part of a dream that you thought you had, take it. Like I wanted to be a professional athlete, see what that life looked like. And I was like, that was cool. I'm still a mega nerd. So then I came back to do research at the Vanderbilt Bridge program, where I did research on studying the Pleiades, which we use to understand the lives of stars. I moved on to doing my research at the University of Chicago and Fermilab and Vanderbilt to see if the universe is a hologram. And then I moved to California, and I've been first at Caltech and now Caltech and USC. And so I work on building instruments that measure ripples in space-time and also try to create invisibility cloaks that can navigate and steer waves through any sort of medium. So I'm going to share some nuggets of things for you to think about. Is that when I was learning physics, I learned about general relativity, and general relativity predicts that space-time is dynamic. And so what's unique about that is, like, in our everyday life, if I move around, I'm not changing the length of a ruler, it's measuring my distance. So general relativity was this difference in a framework that there's a relationship between mass and space. And so I'm sitting there and like, okay, learning physics and all that, and realize that most of physics is like a soccer game, right? So you're describing the dynamics of how things are moving, and there's a field, but the field and the players aren't really interacting. Yet general relativity is like water polo. So where you have players in the field that are impacting the field and back and forth. And so I say this to you because it's in the beginning of my phase of like coming into my field, is that there's certain parts of my identity that I thought I had to check at the door. One of which was athletics. And so coming back into it, when I finally was able to bring that back into how I think about things, then now we have this beautiful analogy that like relativity and water polo are interchanged, right? So you know those things for yourself, so start to bring that in, right? Like when you're thinking about your science, when you're sharing that with literally anyone. Like I give this in colloquiums to people who are not in my field as a way to really understand what we're doing. And this other piece is that so space-time moves, and if you have masses that are moving, they're generating waves, really. And so they're generating these ripples that stretch and squeeze space-time, and this over-exaggerated picture of the Earth is what happens out in space. And so we need to build a way to measure that. And mostly people talk about this as years, right? So we're gonna have another way to measure the space. But I'm like, wait, this is like a boat. And so then I get to, when I talk about this, bring in a boat that's incredibly significant in my culture, which is the hokulea, which is a Polynesian voyaging canoe that proved that we were deep sea voyagers, okay? So these are things and ways in which you can incorporate yourself while still giving a super highly technical talk to your peers or like anyone else in your field, but also outside of that, right? So this is the value of bringing yourself in there. And so anyway, those things are just super duper fancy rulers. and bring yourself into your pictures. Like if you're a cool kid with sunglasses, it's really like laser goggles. You can bring this into your images. So when I, like, growing up in Hawaii there's a practice and way of being that's been so, it's in who I am in my soul. And so you probably heard the word aloha, and it gets translated into hello, goodbye, I love you, all of these things, because it's a very deep prophetic word. And so part of this word is ha, okay? So ha means the breath of life. And so that means that when we greet one another, we're really deeply acknowledging the other person that we're speaking with and engaging with. And the aloha spirit that you hear about in Hawaii is that way of just caring, right? And acknowledging each other and not putting like boundaries on things. The boundary only comes if you're disrespectful. If you're respectful, you know, like, then that's this reciprocal way of respecting one another, okay? I also grew up in a very community-based place, right? Like we help each other to clean up oceans, to support like somebody's journey, right? Like that is very core to what I grew up with. And it became very counter to things that I experienced along my path, because there wasn't, as much as people were using the word community, it was not to the way in which I knew what community looks like, where we care for each other on this deep sort of way. So I want you to realize that everything that you do is that you are generating a ripple, right? From all the words that you say, from everyone that you talk to, you're influencing people, whether you think you're doing it or not, right? There's some people who are like major influencers, like, you know, Michelle Obama, but you yourself are an influencer to everyone around you. So you're over here, and if you think about it, right? You write emails, you send text messages, you run this experiment, you take the data, you talk to people. These are all things within your control of like what is coming out of your face, right? Or your fingers, okay? And then from that you grow and you start to interact with more communities, and that could be from your research groups to anyone that you decide to go and communicate with and engage with. And from there you're building bigger and bigger, right? In terms of the ripples that you're sending out to anyone who's going to read anything you say, to the people that you talk to directly, to someone who might read this somewhere across the world, right? And so you get to think about what message are you going to send to people. So along the path, you start to realize that we're embedded in a system, and that system is impacting our consciousness. And that consciousness is like the bias that we see, who we think is smart, all of those things that whether we're aware of it or not, they're in here, right? And so when you decide on what you're going to say, you're impacting the consciousness of each other. So when I want to help you realize that when you're communicating science, it's, you know, you're a translator. You're translating from the mega nerds in your field to people who are just like, oh, what are you up to? That's cool. And each of the different groups give you an opportunity to figure out how to connect. And so you need to listen to the value system of the groups and the people that you're interacting with in order to build the strongest connections when you want to share your message. And so in Hawaii, we talk about initiatives that go from keiki to kupuna. So keiki are the children, kupuna are the elders, and everyone in between. And so that's informed a lot of decisions on what kinds of things I engage with to really impact and transform and change the communities we're in. So I know you know this, but like seriously, like use every platform that you have to share your story and what you know. So like straight up Twitter, TikTok, YouTube, blogs, get a mic, like just straight up go somewhere, open mic night, tell them anything, right? Go to Wikipedia, right? If you see something on that page, which is one of the most influential pieces of information people seek out, change it. Like you can edit Wikipedia, and going through your classes, going through the experiences, you know how to build citations, bring that in there, and like really add that content into there and be part of that community. So I share that with you because yes, while you know these exist, you can think about how to bring your story into these spaces. And each of them are very different. So you need to figure out which ones you resonate with and which ones are like, I don't know how I feel about that, okay? So go for it. The other piece I want to tell you is find inspiration and schedule it in. Like, yes, I have science influencers, like the communicators that I look up to, but there's people like Beyonce, Megan Rapinoe, Michelle Obama, that like Carly Lloyd, just reading their stories really just help me think in a broader way about what my journey actually means and what I can do with the platforms that I have. Lily Singh wrote this really awesome book on how to be a boss. So you should definitely go and check that out. And so the last phase of things I wanted to share with you is that not only is it communication and engagement, really, you know, the sharing of to anyone that you're talking to, there's also opportunities for transformation. So when I mean transformation, they could be very big things or they can be small scale things, and you get to do this. And so if you're like, oh, I want to learn more about the lives of scientists, you can interview all the faculty who are in your university. You know, it's something that I did as an undergrad. When I went into my master's, I initiated the Bridge Underground, where we came together as students and we campaigned and advocated for things like a seat at the table. We created welcome packets for incoming students so they like kind of knew what they were getting into. And when I was at UChicago, I created a research symposium for grad students because we didn't have a place to practice speaking about our science. So I say that because any sphere that you're in, you have an opportunity to really help enhance the environment. And then there's going to be times where all the things come together and you got to like go big. So SACNAS came to Hawaii in 2019. I was like, oh my God, SACNAS is something that if you all should figure out a way to engage with and resonate with, because there's amazing, beautiful people that you get to learn from there. And they've always been like a recharging post along my path. And so coming to Hawaii, I was like, oh my gosh, my home and my culture, my science, who I am as a person, this is all coming together. So I was MC, I was part of the culture advisory committee to make sure that our language is properly represented, like all those little things. But at the same time, there's this very big thing that was happening right before our conference, which was the demonstrations that were happening on Mauna Kea. And so this is a very, very heavy topic for me. There are not many people in my field who are Native Hawaiian. And so when you're a translator, you can hear the stories from everywhere, right? And it feels like it's a lot of weight to hold on to. And you need to decide for yourself, how can you move forward? Like you know something's missing, how do you move through it? So what I did is advocated for space, right? Like I knew people had to be in a compassionate conversation, like ways to engage with one another, ways to learn. And so we worked as a community to bring those things together, like creating a room where people could come and like sit and talk and reflect and engage, having facilitated dialogues about how this is impacting us, redesigning sessions to ensure there's enough voices representing what's happening, creating a reading list, you know, and just like, did I solve this problem? No. Like, did I know that like there's a way that I can contribute to help transform this space into one that's going to be healthy as a collective growth, right? It's very well could have been a hot mess. We all know it could have been, but I was not okay with that happening, okay? Amongst this, you know, you'll find the different identities that you're looking for community to resonate with. So through my path as a Native Hawaiian woman, I didn't have a group of Indigenous people to connect with. And so there's a society of Hispanic physicists, the National Society of Black Physicists, and I would go to them, but there's missing conversations for me as an Indigenous person. So we have just started the Society of Indigenous Physicists. So if anyone, it's like physics, astronomy, whatever, come, we're your friends. So you know that we exist. And so when we talk about transformation, there's ways that you can do it where you gotta like just straight up go and talk to someone and be like, listen, bro. There's other ways of transformation where you're highlighting and you're showing that we exist and normalizing our existence by the science that we do, amplifying our voices, knowing that we're here. These are different ways to approach it. So come find us on indigenousphysicists.com. We've got like we meet monthly and kind of connect through Zoom. So we have Slack and all those things. And another way is that you can put your voices and what you know needs to exist in different platforms. So the American Physical Society has this newsletter that comes out and they asked us what challenges do Indigenous physicists face, and we're like, let me tell you. So we put together a report, and now this is existing in this space to start to help transform. So lastly, I'll tell you about shutdowns then. Last year, who knows what day it is anymore, right? So last year when our entire country was responding to the race issues that we have in our country, you know, we had a lot of industries that were showing up to say we're going to transform in a big sort of way. That didn't exist yet in science. The music industry was doing it, sports, all of this. But how are we as scientists going to show up and really transform? And so I initiated this as one of the co-leaders and co-founders of this to educate those who need to be educated, activate them to get to work and come up with a plan, and also for those who've experienced anti-Black racism to find communities and heal through this. So we really put together this call to action, which grew into the most beautiful thing of so many different organizations and groups coming together. And I want to make it clear that this is truly leaders leading with leaders. It's not like me being a like dictator, like do all the things. It was just shoulder to shoulder, knowing what we had to do to show up for our communities and create this sort of transformation within science, which I still, year plus later, I'm hearing the ripple effects of substantial changes that are happening. This last piece of showing what it looks like is that you get to model the transformation that you want to see. And in this article that I got to work on with Dr. Heather Kaluna and Kalepa Babian, who is an amazing navigator who's at the highest level that exists today, we got to collaborate on thinking about what it means to explore beyond our planet. And so bringing in Indigenous wisdom beyond our ivory tower framework is a way to show that we really have so much other knowledge beyond this particular pipeline. So I say all these things to you, but I want to communicate that you really, 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 I know it's hard because I have to practice it all the time, is like learning how to care for yourself. It's really a balance between where you are with your degrees, what kind of things you want to do to give back to your community. And it's very easy to run yourself ragged. So find ways to intentionally design your days to recharge. And once you figure that out, share it with people. So here's an article that I wrote on Medium, like what you need to recharge, some other things. But think about that intentionally. And find your people. I know Kevin talked about this, about finding your people at SACNIS who will support you. And the word network kind of stresses me out, but really find the people who you like, and they're on your team and they're your friends. So those are the people who've always carried me through, supported me, the ones that you call up and you're like, why am I doing this? You know, so collective community care is really what's going to help us transform. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to all our questions.
You hit so many awesome points, Dr. Kamai, and I'm ready to kind of dig deep. I guess it depends on I know students, you all submitted questions, or attendees, you all submitted questions to us that we can go into, but I guess to kind of start it off, you know, I really like the aspect that both Dr. Torres and Dr. Kamai brought in the importance of bringing their identities into it. But before we can even dive into science communication, Dr. Kamai, you brought up a good point in terms of there's so many different types of science communication out there. So it's kind of finding which one resonates with you before coming up with an action plan of how you're going to approach the science communication. And so I want to ask each of you, you know, Dr. Torres, why did you choose podcasting as your first form of as your medium of science communication? Dr. Kamai, yours is mostly very in-person kind of engaging, or whichever one you want to focus on, I guess. Just starting off to what medium did you choose and why?
Yeah. Okay, me? All right. So so it's interesting because I chose podcasting because of my colleague, the co-founder of Caminos de Ciencia, Dr. Enrique Linchao, who had experience before doing podcasts and listening to podcasts. At that moment, I was not I never listened to a podcast before. So actually I started listening while, doing podcasting through Caminos en Ciencia, which is interesting, ¿verdad? Because someone will start podcasting, by listening to other podcasts, but that wasn't my case. So it was very hard at the beginning trying to understand, the culture of podcasting and, how people engage in this type of science communication platform. But I think it's very important to know your audience, or have an idea what audience you want to target. Know that there is a generational diversity out there. So probably TikTok won't work to a particular generation. It will work to the generation right now that is using TikTok, but other generations, they don't know. I haven't started a TikTok account yet. Probably I will, who knows? But I mostly use Twitter and Facebook. So having that in mind is very important. You always need to know, what audience you're targeting, and with that, then you start developing either science communication platform. You can use Twitter, you can use Facebook, you can use YouTube, podcasts, anything you want. But first, you need to know the audience that you're trying to target. That would be my answer.
Awesome. Yeah, I think I went down a path of experimenting with a lot of different low-key things, right? Like you can say yes to doing a 1-day, 2-hour event with 7th grade girls, right? And like, that's like, you're like, oh, do I resonate with that? Also with the different platforms, right? Like, do I like tweeting? Like, are there people that I look forward to? Like, one person I look up to, I know this is so nerdy, but he tweeted about quantum field theory in 3 tweets. And I'm like, those are goals. Like, that's what I want to do. And so you start to find, I think for me, it's just like testing which ones resonates with the stories I want to tell, because each platform offers different things. And exactly as Dr. Torres is saying, is that like, you're going to connect with different groups. And not only is it generational, but it's also like regional, right? Like some like groups, like a lot of Pacific Islanders are on Facebook, right? So if I'm not on Facebook, I'm not engaging with that group. A lot of nerds are on Twitter, right? Like you can have scholarly conversations on Twitter, right? And so, I think I experiment with a lot of them. And it was when I was in my PhD where I had an opportunity to work with senior centers, and it really opened and transformed my mind. Because I think like we don't focus enough on how do we support the entire community to engage with science, right? We're like, oh yeah, some girl when you're like 5, all of a sudden you'll come in and just wreck house. It's like, yo, I'm dead when that happens, right? So I like to think about like the adults, the parents, the grandparents, like the people who are creating these ripple effects in the child's life that can complement the other works that we're doing, right? So like it's more experimenting like super low key ways, and then you get to tune into it, right? Exactly as Dr. Torres said, it's like, okay, I like these people. This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to practice and tune into how to be an effective communicator in those spaces.
Yeah, sometimes it can be intimidating seeing that like science communication is an emerging field right now. There's already people that have established their niches, but it's really important what you bring up about experimenting, because I think I did the same thing too. I was like, I'm already on Instagram. I like Instagram as my platform. So I'm just going to use Instagram as my tool to experiment different types of science communication from other accounts that are, bigger in numbers and have done cooler things, and try to figure out the type of style. Is Instagram the platform that I want to be, the type of people that I'm resonating with? And so, don't feel the pressure to like have to know these things. But, Dr. Torres also brings up a valid point. You have to kind of know your audience, or at least start off with like, okay, I know I like working with this type of, group or demographic. So let me just go to where they're at and meet them at where they're going to be residing, whether that be virtually or in person.
You reminded me of something I wanted to share that I don't think I have yet to hear this, is when you decide to share something, also think about the ripple response about the things that you share. And I think that that's a very undervalued piece, is that like sometimes it's like, oh, let's talk about the struggles, right? But then it's like, I put my struggles out there and there's a lot of recovery that I need to go through when people are responding to that, sharing their things, like whatever. And so I say that as like a learn your awareness around what topics you can talk about, and like how it's also showing up in other places in your life. Because I learned, I'm like, okay, maybe I'm not going to talk about that on Twitter, like, because it was really impacting my work, my health, like all the things, right? So don't share what you don't feel like you have to, or just because other people are doing it, you don't have to do it too. So,
yeah, and I think, it's like kind of being self-aware of like our boundaries, our level of expertise, our comfort of talking about that conversation. And like, we're talking about like bringing our identities into the spaces, but there's some things that are worth protecting. And, advocating online it's a whole different thing on its own because, you have the vulnerability, I guess, or the opportunity for it to kind of like go viral in other spaces that you probably weren't trying to have it received at. So there's a lot that goes into it, but I think that kind of comes down to kind of like coming up with the plan and just not posting things for the sake of posting, but kind of have maybe more intentionality of the type of science communication that you want to be practicing and working with. So I guess in terms of like coming up with like our approach and our strategy. So like for I guess before I like share with you my ideas, I guess I want to understand, Dr. Kamai, when you approach the older community, I forgot what community. I'm so sorry. The older community that you're going to, like, what was your approach into how you were like, what was your plan of action before you entered into that space to talk about science? And then Dr. Torres, same thing with your approach and how you're trying to plan out your communication for your podcasting.
I approached interacting with seniors. So seniors can be anyone over 50, right? Depends who you talk to, right? So it doesn't have to be like in a senior home. But what I approached it as is to relate the science that I do with their lives. And so, for example, I study the entire universe, and all of these major discoveries, when they were born, we didn't know that the Big Bang was a thing, the universe expanding, and all of that. And so then getting to connect with them of like, okay, what were you doing in 1975? And then like you hear a bunch of stories about like, oh, I got arrested or whatever, just like partying, kind of a thing, like all these wild stories so that they could learn that when they were living, these things are also happening. So it's just kind of connecting in a way that puts us and our lives into the evolution of knowledge that's happening right next to us.
So, so in our case, I think that we are doing this podcast for the general public. We just have a wider audience. Probably like it's not for kids yet because probably we haven't figured out a way to reach kids. Although we have some ideas to collaborate with teachers and bring these stories into the classroom. So we had that. That's a work in progress. But basically the general community, whoever is in social media and wants to know about the story of a colleague or someone that they see as a role model. One thing that we started doing at the beginning when we were working on this podcast, we tried to interview scientists from Latin American that they were from different diverse countries. We didn't want to focus in the Latin American scientists doing science within the US. So how we approached that, it was very interesting because what we did is just that we were at Penn, so there were lots of conferences that I'm pretty sure it happens in many institutions, and they were always hosting scientists from everywhere. And we tried to identify those scientists that they were coming from Latin America. We kind of figured out, okay, he has a Hispanic last name. We just, kind of stalking the person and trying to figure out whether they speak Spanish, because you don't want to send the email, oh, do you want to participate in the podcast? Oh, sorry, I don't know Spanish. So, I don't want to make that email uncomfortable for them. So we made sure that they speak Spanish, and we try to invite them for an interview. And that's how that map that I show you at the beginning, we were able to reach or have a audience in all these countries that we were having people interview for our podcast. But then what was interesting is just that then we saw the audience was growing in other countries that we haven't interviewed people yet. So that means that there are Latin American scientists in those countries. And that's why we were thinking about creating these bridges and see how we can support these scientists or students that they are trying to find role models and know about resources and learn about other people's experiences. But that basically was the strategy at the beginning. We tried to identify scientists from everywhere, from all Latin America, to make sure that we are able to reach to each of the countries in South America and Central America, and also in the Caribbean. So that was the approach that we used at the beginning.
Yeah, something I'm learning about and more as I dive into like my research with science communication is learning about like the strategy. So like we mentioned, it's finding your audience, finding the medium or like where the audience is going to be at or whatever platform you're going to be interested in. And then the next in the list is usually the messaging. So, we talk about there's this thing called a deficit model where we have this misconception that like, oh, if only we educate people more, if they knew more facts, if they knew more about this, and they'll understand the science. But as people, we're all very complex. We have very different values, backgrounds, and motivations. And so how do you go about constructing the messaging in both of the platforms or in the science communication that you all practice, and any kind of like tips that we can probably tell our audience today?
Yeah, I have a lot of feelings about this. Like, I hear you, because I feel like what I find frustrating about wanting to really see diverse representation is that we're I don't know if it's like the interviewees that are forcing a narrative, or we feel like we have to tell just trauma stories, right? And it's just like, yo, like, we're so much stronger and bolder and brilliant than anyone gives credit to, right? So like, why am I gonna continue down this path of saying like, telling you those things, right? Like, I'm gonna tell you and show you like these are amazing people, and also reflect back to you that the reason we don't have certain demographics in this field is because you're not effectively evaluating the environment in which you're bringing people into, And so it's like, okay, if we're gonna be in those rooms and like, oh, let's go do more, I don't know. And it's like, okay, what are you doing too, right? Like, are you showing up to really learn what's impacting that demographic that you're trying to affect? So I think like there's two sides of it that I approach, is like amplifying more brilliance, and normalizing that we are here, right? And stop saying these things that like, I had to evolve in telling my story, because I was like, oh yeah, this, and this, I didn't have blah, 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 and whatever. And it's like, no, but I did have an abundance of this, right? Like, sure, my parents didn't have these degrees, but they taught me how to be incredibly compassionate people, ways to listen and build analogies, and like, those types of valuable things when they give you this script of deficit, right? So then we get to choose, are we going to continue that? No. Like, no. And if someone asks you those questions, let's have another conversation, right? Let's reflect back on what we're doing. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because I clearly have some feelings about that.
Thank you for being transparent with your perspective. Dr. Torres, do you have any like, how do you approach about like, I guess the messaging that you try to construct in the science communication that you do?
So, I mean, basically, the message that we always wanted to construct in the podcast is to showcase that scientists are humans as well, and to humanize science. I think that's our main goal, to share these stories. And I mean, we also construct the questions in order like for the interviewee to share particular things that we know that our audience are not aware yet. For example, like in Latin America, what we have figured out when we talk about microaggressions, imposter syndrome, racism, anti-racism in science, all these things, probably we have a lot of discussions in the US about this. But in Latin America, we haven't had these conversations, with the general public, systemically as well, in each institution. And there is, I mean, in Latin America, we experience racism, colorism, we experience all these things as well, maybe in a different way, but we still experience them, but we don't talk about it. So breaking that idea that science is, doesn't have these experiences that the whole society are experimenting at that particular moment with all these topics. So that's something that we try to approach in our interviews, making sure that they highlight their experiences and how they overcame those struggles and challenges, and also what resources they use. I mean, mental health is also a very important topic across the whole world, right? And there is a lot of conversation about it. So we make sure that we get out of the, if the person is not comfortable, like, Brittany mentioned, if they're not comfortable to sharing that, it's okay. I mean, we move on to another question. We haven't had that experience yet. Most of the people are very open, which is great, because it's good that to be open about your own experiences, because you don't know who you are impacting or who's suffering the same kind of things that you were suffering in the past, and they might be, empowered and inspired by your story. So that's how we approach it, and those are some of the things that we do with our podcast and other, science communication initiatives.
I also want to point out kind of like that, like, it's cool, the differences approaches that you two are also providing, where like Dr. Torres is trying to humanize the scientists behind the science to maybe to build more compassion or more understanding about like the people that are, in the brink of discoveries. And then Dr. Kamau, you've shown different types of ways to talk about a complex a complex subject such as physics to people that are like well outside our little academic bubble. And so I do have a question from the Q&A. Someone, Diana asked, can you share some stories on the effects your work has had on your community or on individuals?
So, Diana, that's a great question. And I think that we have seen the impact in many, different ways. For example, with the podcast, we've seen how there's, the stories that we share can impact, younger generations by, just seeing their tweets about the story when they're saying. We have one person that didn't know about SACNAS, and they learn about SACNAS through one of the stories that we share through Caminos en Ciencia. And that person shared that, as soon as he learned about SACNAS, he was, inspired, empowered, that he was able to embrace his identity, bring his culture into science. So he wasn't aware of all these things. So I would say, like, through social media, you can have a sense of how your work is impacting others. The same when I was doing the AAS Mass Media Fellowship, when I was writing stories, I could see in the comments the feedback that I was given after I wrote this, any particular story, which was great, because that allowed me to engage in a conversation that I didn't thought that I was gonna be able to do without, sharing that story. That I wrote for the newspaper. So that's how you can see the impact. Sometimes you might not have any feedback, and that's okay. You always need to to know yourself and continue working, because at the end maybe someone doesn't want to share the impact that your work had on that particular person, but you're still having an impact. So you continue developing any kind of science communication initiative that you want to develop, and just hope that you're impacting someone, but not all the time you will get feedback. You wanted to throw that out there, because at the beginning we didn't receive any kind of feedback. It was after we kind of develop more stories and share more stories that we started getting feedback and comments and suggestions, and how the stories impact them, and so on. So yeah, just maybe at the beginning not gonna be how you want it, but probably it's vice versa. Probably at the beginning, so much feedback, and then after a year you don't receive anything. So no, just continue working, because science communication is hugely important, and we need to have more people working on this.
Diana, thank you for your question. It's a really big one. I think exactly as Dr. Torres said, is that there's sometimes people will tell you your impact you've made on them, and other ones you don't actually know. And so there's somewhere I'm like, one student 4 years ago, I told them, like, what, dress how you want to dress, to be confident in every single space you want to be. And I met her, she found me 4 years later and told me after that, she just would wear what would empower her to just show up in her spaces, you know? And so, I mean, like, there's those little things that you're just like, I don't know what I was going on about. I was like, wear your colors, be your thing, you know? And that allowed her to share her science, right? Like, to really elevate herself within her community. There's other ones where it's like, the ripple effects of shut down STEM are so big, I can't even wrap my head around it. But then it's like, I learned things of like how NASA has changed one of its like key pillars of the whole entire agency. Like there's like every funding agency is trying to figure out how to respond better to this. There are things from like hiring faculty that have changed to more representation within like, oh my gosh, my physics newsletter. I was like, did I morph into a new world? Like it just, so there's things where it's like I also find it funny when like someone's telling me about like, oh, did you hear about the shutdown STEM thing? And I'm like, yeah, tell me about it. So I'd like to hear also like, like, oh, wow, this is really, really transforming like conversations that people can have that they couldn't ever have before and open the door for that. So it's like everything, like there's a very wide range. And I will add that like you should go and do the things that's gonna like make you feel stoked, right? Is that like if I wrote something and I'm just like, you know what, I'm throwing it out there. If anyone reads it, I don't care. Like that's the kind of thing that like you're gonna continue to fill yourself up regardless if anyone gives you a like or not. Sometimes I'm like a little bit like, what, you didn't like that tweet? But that's fine. Right? So it's just I think it's, you're going to find it and find ways to feel it in different ways, and then people will tell you in times you'll never realize. So just keep doing your thing. Can't wait to hear what you're going to get up to, Diana.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a very valid point about like you want to be stoked about what you're wanting to communicate, like showing passion, showing enthusiasm, showing like if you're excited about it, it's going to get someone else pumped and wanting to talk about it. So like don't feel you have to be obligated to just stick to the little niche that you're researching, because sometimes it's not really what excites us. A lot of my friends in the science communication space are like, astrophysicists who like to write about plants. Like you don't have to feel like you have to only talk about your specific thing. Like for me, example, my background in training is in chemistry, but now I'm mostly just only focus on just science communication as a whole and the research behind science communication and the theory and practice. A lot of questions that I got from the students and through the submission portals is kind of like, have you faced any barriers or any like challenges in communicating, and how do you work through like talking about difficult topics or with difficult communities that you're trying to communicate with? It's a loaded question, but
yeah, I can jump in. I think that there's some things where there's going to be people that you run into within the field of academia or like in academia who are going to just be straight up haters on you doing literally anything, right? They'll be like, why do you spend so much time on Twitter? It's like, whatever, bro, like get off me. So I think it's that of like trying to figure out what the critique is really about, because it's not really about you. And then doing the experiments in a way of, if I go and like I do a 1 week AAAS thing, and like I'll tell my advisor, like, this is what I'm thinking about in my life. Like that's a way that I can kind of evolve my experiments into a space where people might not be receptive to it. And also like I think there's different platforms for what you need to share, right? Like, so sometimes if I want to share more about like the struggles of my journey, I'll write spoken word poetry and perform that, right? And that's something where it's like it's emotive, right? Like that's what the experience is. And that's the right platform for me, like how I feel in that way. So I think, yeah, you're gonna like, just here's what I remember, what I think about. Beyonce has 24 hours in the day. She straight up had a whole bunch of haters. So did she listen to them? Obviously not. Okay, so keep that in mind when you're doing your thing.
Could you repeat the question?
Just kind of like any tips on approaching difficult conversations or difficult communities when it comes to communicating the science?
Yeah, so I mean, I had similar experiences, and as Brittany say, I mean, for example, this morning I sent a tweet about STEM boot camp, and in the tweet I use X to be inclusive, like Latinx, for example, and someone like since when we are supposed to use Latinx? You're a professional, why you're using that? And sometimes you need to choose your battle, and I mean at that moment I said, you know what, I'm not gonna start debating with this person about something that that is just I just want to make a point to be inclusive in my tweet, and that's it. I mean, if someone doesn't like it, okay, I keep going. I'm not gonna go after them. And the same with science communication. Many people will not be happy with what you're sharing with them. Like if someone believes that the COVID vaccine was made within a year, and you're trying to explain that no, it's been, we've been working on that for years and years, right? It wasn't like, since yesterday we decided to do RNA vaccine and test it on the whole world. No, it doesn't work like that. And you always, you always need to try the best, right? And do the best effort on trying to explain what science is about, and try to always find misinformation with with facts, with data. And if at the end the person is still thinking the same, it's okay, you can move on. You will encounter these similar experiences in the future, and probably that person you were not able to either change their mind or make them understand more about the science, but maybe you planted a seed on them, right? And maybe later they say, okay, wait a minute, let me start, reading more about this idea that the vaccine was made within a year. And maybe, who knows? Maybe you never know, because maybe that person goes back their home and start, searching for the right, for trustable sources, and get to the same point that you were trying to explain them. But maybe people reacting that way at that moment say, okay, I don't want to listen to you because I feel that you're condescending. Then who knows? I mean, humans are very difficult, right? To understand. So you do your best, try what you can to communicate the science, and just let the people to take their own decisions. At least you did your part, right? And I think that that's important.
Yeah, that's a great note to end on. Thank you everyone for staying. I know we went a little bit over time, but I think I just want to kind of emphasize what Dr. Torres and Dr. Kamai have kind of said is just like, it's not like, even though we're talking about transforming, it's not about like seeing direct impact and changing minds right away. It's about the exchange of conversation, the exchange of ideas, the exchange of identities and perspectives, and having that dialogue between the communities that you're trying to be involved, even if it's not within your direct community or outside the direct community. So I want to thank you all for Dr. Kamai and Dr. Torres for being with me, for the attendees for being here. Make sure to follow all of us and feel free to talk about more to continue this conversation with science communication. And of course, thank you to the Leadership Alliance for hosting this awesome workshop and panel. Thank you all. I'll put Dr. Kamai put her socials in the chat. I'll go ahead and do the same. But yeah, best of luck with everyone in your endeavors, and hope to see you all doing awesome science communication in the future.